Um, it looks like you, it looks like all of y'all are muted, so I get to be in charge and stuff like that. So here's what happened is I got, or Amy got, I think 15 different questions submitted. And so I have written up on my one of my other computers here answers to them. So my eyes will be going back and forth to take a look at my notes. And I've organized them in a sort of a easier to more complex manner. Um, but before we get started, what I want to tell you is that any question is fair game. So if there are other questions that come up that you want to ask during this time when I'm walking through these ones that we've already gotten, feel free to submit them and uh, via chat, and I'll try to look at the chat here in a little while and see if we've got some more. But I'm just going to start going, and if I'm doing it wrong, okay, sorry about that. So first question, would you mind sharing with us your journey to Grace Lutheran Church? Sure, I'd be happy to. So I got up this morning and drove out of my driveway and went east on 287. No, that's not what you mean, is it? Um, in the field of ministry, here's what I mean, or here's how I got to Grace. So when I grew up in a small town in Texas, and my whole time growing up, my family was regular participants in the life of a Lutheran congregation there in small town Texas. So I grew up going to church virtually every Sunday. Um, when I graduated high school, I got a job working at a Lutheran summer camp, and I did that for 4 summers. So I had this faith component to my summers. Then I went to college, and in between the summer I was working at camp, I was at college, and I fell into studying religion. So I discovered that I loved the study of religion and the living of a life of faith between college and summer camp. And so I got a degree in religion. And then after college, I thought to myself, what am I going to do? How am I going to get a job? So I decided to go to graduate school. I went to seminary, but I was too nervous about calling it seminary. So I told everybody for the first 2 years of seminary that I went to graduate school. I went to seminary here in Denver at the Isle School of Theology for 3 years. I went to Pacific Lutheran Theological Seminary in Berkeley for a year. And then I was done with the schooling bit of it, but I had to do an internship. So my internship was at United Lutheran Church in Eugene, Oregon, and I was there half the time, and the other half of the time that I was in, like half of the week each week, I was working as the chaplain in a nursing home there in Eugene. So I split my time every week between church and nursing home. My first call was in Ephrata, Washington, at Holy Trinity Lutheran Church. So Ephrata is in eastern Washington in the dry part of the state. If you draw an X from across from corner to corner of Washington, Ephrata is right there where the lines cross, give or take. I was associate pastor and did a lot of youth and household ministry up there. And I was there for a couple of years. And then I came to Bethlehem Lutheran in Longmont, so just up the road from Boulder here. And I was the associate pastor at Bethlehem doing a whole bunch of youth and household ministry there for 6.5 years. And then from there, moved to Denver and served for 12 and a half years at Holy Love. Then I came here. So that's kind of the ministry journey that I went on. And some of these, the answers will get sort of overlapping with each other. But the next question here is, it says, you were born where? You lived in Texas from when to when? You went on to where? So a little bit more details about that. I was born, and I don't really like to share this because I like to brag about being from Texas because it's fun to do in Colorado, especially on the ski slopes. But I was born in Illinois. My family, though, moved to Texas when I was like 9 months old. So it was before I learned the language that they speak in the upper Midwest and in that part of the world. So I grew up learning to speak Texan. I lived in a small town in Texas called Elgin. It's about half an hour east of Austin, maybe a little bit more now that there's more people down there. And Elgin is known as the hot sausage capital of Texas. So when I was growing up, there were at least three or four, maybe more, uh, places in town, in this town of 4,500 people, four or five of them that made sausage to sell around the state at least. And at least a couple of those are still operational and they're delicious. So I grew up in Elgin, lived there from when I was probably 3 until I went off to college. Went to San Antonio to go to college at Trinity Lutheran or Trinity University, which is, at least nominally a Presbyterian school, but there was not much Presbyterianism evident for students. So I was at San Antonio for 4 years of college, and in between those years, I worked at summer camp in Texas. I came up here to Denver to go to seminary, to graduate school. Oakland, um, I lived in Oakland when I was in school in Berkeley at Pacific Lutheran. And then, like I said, Ephrata, Washington, Longmont, and then lived in Denver while I served Holy Love in Aurora. And now we live in Lafayette, right along 287, just south of South Boulder Road, at a little bit north of the hospital there. And now that I have a call here in Boulder. Which summer camp? So Carol just messaged me on chat. Which summer camp? I worked at, when I was working at summer camp, the camps in Texas, which are separate now, were together under one umbrella. So it was known as Lutheran Outdoor and Retreat Ministries of the Southwest. So the biggest camp was Camp Chrysalis. That's where we did our staff training, and that was the camp that could take the most campers. Also, and I worked there for probably half of one of the summers. The first summer I worked at Ebert Ranch Camp, which is in Harper, Texas, just up the road from Kerrville, where Chrysalis is. One of the other camps that was under the same umbrella then, but is not now, is Luther Hill, which is over in LaGrange, Texas, which is the same LaGrange that ZZ Top sings about. One of the camps that is a Lutheran camp now is Briarwood, but when I was at camp, working at camp, it was a Presbyterian camp, and the Lutherans, we rented it from the Presbyterians for a couple of weeks during the summer, and so I worked up there for a couple of years. I also spent time traveling in a white van, a 15-passenger van that we called Tammy the Holy Swiss Miss, all around the state of Texas, doing camps for high schoolers in different locations and middle schoolers, for kids at churches doing day camps. And then I spent 2 of those 4 summers spending 3 weeks living on Padre Island under big canvas tents doing a beach camp. Camp Chrysalis is where Carol went to confirmation camp. Very cool. Very cool. I love Camp Chrysalis. Great place to be. Let's see. So that's that. Education, small town. Yeah. So the next question that I see, how did I end up choosing Iliff? I ended up choosing Iliff as my first seminary because, okay, honestly, I was reluctant to go to a Lutheran seminary because I thought they were too insular and would not give me a broad enough education. Turns out I was wrong about that, but I didn't know that at college age. So, so my advisor in college, we talked through all the different schools that I might go to, and it came down to, so I applied to Lutheran School of Theology at Chicago as my backup seminary. And my advisor talked me into, with good reason, applying to Union Theological Seminary in New York and to Iliff here in Denver. And I got into all 3 of those places, and then thought to myself, should I go to Union in New York, which has this great, fantastic history and culture, and it's in New York, or should I go to Iliff, which I didn't know that much about, but it was in Denver, and I chose Iliff because Denver and mountains, and I like to be outside. So thanks for the question. The next question that I see that had got turned in was, tell us about your education and experience before taking the call at Holy Love. I think I covered that. Uh, but yeah, yeah, Ephrata, Washington at Holy Trinity there was my first call. That was a couple of years, and I got sort of an introduction to pastoral ministry, and then came to Bethlehem and dug into doing youth and household ministry in all kinds of ways, and then moved to Holy Love, and obviously was the only pastor there, so obviously did all the pastoral ministry that I could there, all the different angles and perspectives on it. If whoever it was that asked that question wants more, please ask more. Another question, I would like to hear some biographical information. Where were you born? What was your schooling? Who is your family? That sort of thing. So we've done the where were you born? Where have I lived? Where is my schooling? What I'm going to do now is see if I can share with you some photos of my family. I'm going to do my best to make this work and share my monitor with you because I have some photos here of my family. So I hope this is working. But this is a photo of Nicole, who you just saw a minute ago in the background, and the three boys that are my stepsons, her children. This is from a camping trip, a year and a half ago? There's a picture of Gabriel, who right now is 7. Gabriel lives half-time in the house with us. There is Lucas, who now is 5, Gabriel's brother. He lives half-time in our house with us. And there is Emmett. This picture was taken a week ago, I guess, a week ago tomorrow, which was a holiday, by the way. A week ago tomorrow, April 20th, is National Pineapple Upside Down Cake Day. So Emmett and I made a pineapple upside down cake, and you see it there in the foreground. And there's all 3 of the boys doing doing a PE class during this quarantine homeschooling time. This is in a creek back just not too far from our house, like a 2-minute bike ride. There's Lucas and Gabriel and Emmett. I didn't know this was going to be active, but here it is. They're having ice cream in our backyard. There is Lucas and Emmett around the fire, and in between them is my daughter Harper, who is 21 and is a student at Pacific Lutheran University out in Tacoma, Washington, and works the past 2 summers and this coming summer at Rainbow Trail Lutheran Camp. There is Emmett learning to flip a deck of cards with my son Judah, who is 19, who is really good at doing all kinds of card tricks and whatnot. Oh, one more. Judah is just graduated high school last May and is working and graduated with like a year's worth or a year and a half's worth of college credit, and is now working doing computer programming kind of stuff for Aetna, and also working at Starbucks, at one of the Starbucks down in Denver. Judah lives in Denver in the house where we moved when I took the call at Holy Love. There is me and Harper playing at Rainbow Trail a couple of summers ago, playing a song at the talent show. There is me and Judah. We're playing music for a big group of folks at the National Youth Gathering. We're playing for our Synod Youth Gathering when we're singing. And there's others with us, but I zoomed in on this photo to just get me and Judah there. Let's see. And there is Judah. Judah, this is him speaking at the Synod Youth Gathering last November, I think. Judah was on the Youth Leadership Council, who helped put together the youth gathering then. Let's see, and there is me and Nicole on vacation a year and a half ago or so in the great state of Hawaii. So, so that's the, how do I make this go back? That's the photos that I have to show y'all. How do I make this? I don't know how to go back to not share. There it is. I magically did it. So that's my family. Also, I don't have photos of them, but my parents live about I don't know 10 minutes away from where we live. Um, and my brother, and I think they even dialed in to worship this morning. And my brother, who's 2 years younger than I am, lives with his wife up in Washington State, way up in northwest Washington, up there by Canada. So that was the answer to that question, family and stuff. Next question on the list here is, do you write the prayers for intercession in the bulletins? Nope. They come from an ELCA worship resource, but I will tell you that the prayers, while I find most of the time that they're good, I also like to edit them pretty intentionally so that they make sense for our congregation. So I don't write them, but I do edit them almost every week. Next question. What moved you to leave what appears to be a thriving and vibrant congregation to come to Grace? So let me just say this. I did leave a call at a vibrant. Hiroko says the toilet paper in the prayers was spot on today. Thank you. I did leave a call at a thriving and vibrant congregation, Holy Love, down in South Aurora, to, and I left that call so that I could come to a call serving a thriving and vibrant congregation, Grace Lutheran Church on the Hill in Boulder. So I'm not sure whether the unwritten part of the question was that Grace is not thriving and vibrant, because if that's the thought, then Grace absolutely, then I would disagree. Grace absolutely is a thriving and vibrant congregation. But then to answer the question further, one of the things about pastoral ministry is that sometimes it just makes sense to make a change. And I had been thinking and talking for a while about the truth that I was feeling like it was a time to make a change in the work that I was doing as a pastor. So there were two options. One would be to really dig in and change how I operate and how things operate at Holy Love. And one would be to take a call at another congregation, at Grace in this case. And when I thought about Holy Love and when I thought about Grace, and what I came to decide was that Holy Love, like any congregation, when they've had a pastor for 12 years or longer, it's probably good for Holy Love to change some things about how they are. And it might be good for Holy Love to better for Holy Love to do that without the pastor who's been there for 12 and a half years. And then also, it was exciting to me to think about coming to Grace Lutheran, because there's some really interesting and exciting stuff that's happening here that is part of my notes further down. So I'm going to hold off talking about that for fear that I will repeat myself, which Nicole is going to chastise me for if I do too much of. So I left a thriving and vibrant congregation to come to a different thriving and vibrant congregation. And I was excited about the ministry that we were doing there. And I'm excited about the ministry that Holy Love will continue to do. And I'm excited about the ministry that we are going to get to do together here at Grace as well. Next question in the order of questions that I have here. What was it that led our synod leaders and bishop to think Grace Church and Pastor Matthew would be a good fit? In other words, what do they consider are our special needs that you may be able to meet? And what are your special needs that we may be able to meet? Recognizing that the bishop is still on the call, I will say this next sentence. and I would say it even if the bishop was not on the call, but he's still there. So I see you there, Bishop Gonya. Um, I am not 100% certain what was in the mind of the bishop and the staff of the office of the bishop. And so I am not going to offer an opinion about what they were thinking about me coming here. But I will talk a little bit about what I think makes Grace a good fit for me and what I think makes me a good fit for Grace. So, a couple of things. Grace is, and hear this in the most loving way because this is genuinely the way I mean it. Grace is kind of an old school Lutheran congregation with a progressive slant. The culture here at Grace, at least from what I can tell so far, seems fairly traditionally, culturally Lutheran. And what you might learn is that when I talk about being Lutheran, I will often distinguish between being culturally Lutheran and being theologically Lutheran. So, for instance, if somebody says, "Yeah, we're having Jello just like all the Lutherans," I will say, "Sure, that's a culturally Lutheran thing, at least here in this country, or at least in the upper Midwest of this country." However, just for instance, since I thought about the bishop a second ago, my guess is that the Lutherans in Madagascar, where the bishop served as pastor for a number of years, my guess is that Lutherans there don't stereotypically have Jello at their potlucks. Maybe I'm wrong. I've never been to Madagascar, but that's my guess. So that's different from being theologically Lutheran, which has absolutely nothing to do with what we do or don't eat, except for thinking about Holy Communion, which theological Lutherans absolutely do share together that beautiful meal. So when I think about Grace being traditionally, culturally Lutheran, um, that doesn't necessarily mean Jello, but it does mean sort of the way that this congregation seems to express itself and to operate has a long history here in this place. But the way this congregation thinks and explores theology doesn't necessarily fit the stereotypical old school Lutheranness. And so, having assumed that about Grace, I will say that I also am kind of an old school Lutheran with a progressive slant. So I am fairly conservative liturgically. Um, I don't like going crazy with making new stuff up in worship. I like and find deep meaning in our Lutheran liturgy, the way that we gather for worship together. Um, and let's see. So I'm fairly conservative liturgically, and I grew up, like I said, in a Lutheran congregation, and it was an old school, a whole bunch of Germans. So the Germans close to my hometown, most of them went to church at St. Peter, where I was a member. But there was another Lutheran church 10 miles outside of town where all the Swedes went. So at least, by heritage. And so I grew up in this German Lutheran congregation that was not Missouri Synod. The Missouri Synod church was across town. Um, but a fairly old school cultural Lutheran congregation. We had, in addition to the eggs and sausage gravy and biscuits on Easter, we also had Jello regularly. But I'm also, and I'm also fairly orthodox theologically, but I'm interested in exploring the edges of theology, and most especially, I'm interested in seeing how pervasive God's grace is in the world. And I think that God's grace and God's love are way more pervasive than a whole lot of Christians think that they are. So I would say that I'm also old school Lutheran with a progressive slant. So I think that we are a good fit in that way. Further, I find that music and taking music seriously are really important to the faith life of a community. I think singing and the richness of music in worship lends depth and breadth and theological significance to worship in ways that we can't really articulate. Um, I think singing is one of the things that 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 churches do that's really important. Um, in my ideal vision of the world, 60, 70 years ago, people would get together in a living room where there was a piano, and the family would get together and sing. Um, we don't really get together and sing together in our world much these days. In fact, as far as I can tell, there are only two places in our world where people sing together. One is church, and the other is the baseball game, where we sing "Take Me Out to the Ball Game." And I think that's a shame. And so I think that's one of the important things that church holds on to is we hold on to this singing together thing. So I'm overjoyed that music is such a central focus of our life, both liturgically and culturally here at Grace, in that we host the recitals and concerts and music lessons and have phenomenal musicians to lead worship. Let me just, this isn't written down, but let me just say, I have always thought that I was lucky. I have been lucky as a pastor to have had really good worship musicians at each one of the congregations I've served. And we'll have to see how things go when we get back together in the same place and we sing together. But from what I can tell, the musicians here at Grace are at least as good as, and maybe better than any of the rest of the musicians that, church musicians that I've been privileged to work with. So thanks to Boyd and to Josh and to Michael and to the section leaders and to all the musicians that contribute to our life together here. As to, I'm still back on this question here, as to so-called special needs, I might protest against using that term. I mean, Grace Lutheran is a special place, but the things that Grace needs are not necessarily special or unusual, because every congregation has particularities that the congregational leadership, the pastor and the elected and natural leadership in the congregation, every congregation has particularities that the congregational leadership should attend to in order to increase the health of that congregation. But those particularities look different in different congregations. So what my big picture project in the first year or so is going to be to help Grace and especially our congregational leadership to sort out what the particularities are for how Grace ventures into the future, journeys together into the future that God is calling us toward. I think that's all I'm going to say about that question for right now. But I think that what's behind that question, if there's some unwritten stuff there, I'm going to get to it in answering some of the next questions. So I'm just going to go on because a lot of these questions kind of overlap. So the next question here is, in your parting letter to your congregation at Holy Love, you said that you were asked by the bishop to become Grace's pastor at this time in their history. How do you understand the meaning of this statement? Where do you think we are in our history? So let's say I use that phrase at this time in their history. Speaking of Grace and Grace's history, I use that phrase as a way to recognize that every congregation has a history and every congregation has a future, and there are certain people that are called to be in leadership at sometimes in the history of a congregation and certain people that are called to be in leadership and other times in the history of that congregation. In fact, one of the congregations I've served, um, they, one person who's a member of that congregation told me that he was asked to be the council president every time there was a pastoral vacancy. So every time a pastor would leave, the congregation would ask this person to be the council president because his leadership was good in those times of transition, but he was never asked to be the congregational president during times when the pastor was just sticking around. So certain people are right for certain times in the congregation's history, and other people are right for other times. Um, I was not the right person to be the pastor at Grace Lutheran Church when I first came to this synod 20 years ago. So I started serving Bethlehem at Christmas time of 2000, so almost 20 years ago. I was not the right person to be your pastor at that time in your history. I think I am the right time to be the pastor here at this time in our history, so in 2020 and going forward. It seems to me, based on what I've heard from the bishop and from the staff of the office of the bishop, that it's a good match for me to be the pastor here right now at Grace. I won't be the pastor at Grace forever because I anticipate that Grace is going to embrace ministry in ways that continue to make this a vibrant and life-giving place long after I'm ready to retire. And so I won't be the right pastor to be here all the time, but I think I'm the right pastor to be here now. It seems to me that Grace is at a place in our history where it would be healthy for us to dream together about how God is calling us to be church in new ways in the future. And I was thinking that about Grace before the pandemic and physical isolation started happening. But the reality of the pandemic and Zoom worship and Zoom question and answer with the pastor, with the bishop right there in the middle of the top of his screen, making him a little nervous. It's okay. I think that all this upheaval in our world is a potential catalyst for us to dream and vision about what it means to be church in different ways in the future, whether that's here at Grace or wherever else. But the work for us together is going to be here at Grace especially. So I anticipate that some of the ways that we have been church here at Grace will remain the same in the future. And I anticipate that some of the ways that we have been church here at Grace will need to change going forward. I'm not sure what those things are yet. I'm not sure what that's going to look like. But I expect to explore those questions together with all of y'all. Let's see, did I answer that question? I think I answered that question. Well, if not, you'll yell at me. Or maybe I'll answer whatever you didn't want answered in the next ones that we have here. So next question, the bishop felt that we needed a pastor on special assignment to help us work out some of our issues before we could call a regular, in quotes, pastor. Many of us were blindsided by this decision. What were you told were our issues? I'm not sure special assignment is the right verbiage, but that's okay. I understand the gist of the question. I was told, so let me, what was I told about the issues here at Grace? I was told all kinds of different things about Grace Lutheran Church before I decided to accept the call here. Then I was told other things about Grace Lutheran Church after I made the decision to accept the call here. And I've been told other things about Grace Lutheran Church in the time since I've started here. I expect that the things that I was told about Grace before I decided to accept the call, and the things that I was told after I accepted the call, and the things that I was told since I started, I expect that all of those things are not 100% accurate. And so whatever it is that I've been told, I'm taking in context and with a grain of salt. Maybe that's not the right phrase, um, but I'm recognizing that everyone has a different perspective and a different angle on the way things work, and that it's going to be more important for us to sort out what it is that we as Grace ought to be taking a look at. It's going to be more important for us to sort that out together than for me to make something up or to believe any one or two people, because I think that the story is as well. I think the story is as broad as this congregation is, and I think that, well, when you, I think you know, when you get three Lutherans in the room together, you're going to have four or five different opinions about any single thing. So I think that we'll sort this stuff all out together. I think that Grace's issue, if you want to call it that, which I don't, but I think that we're being challenged to figure out how to be church in a time and a place and a culture and a society when things are changing ridiculously quickly, and the change is a bit disorienting. And that's true even without the COVID-19 pandemic stuff. But again, societal changes are being necessitated in other ways by this current pandemic. And I think that the upheaval that we're in is a great opportunity for us to allow God to work in creative ways at creating a new ways of being church here on the hill in Boulder. The fact that we're not in the place where we might have wanted to be or we might have been before, and we're not in the place where we're going to yet, means we're on the journey somewhere in between. And the safety box that we've put around ourselves, I think, has some cracks in it, which allows God to enter in surprising ways. And so I'm looking forward to figuring out what those surprising ways are for folks here at Grace, and for us together here at Grace. So let's see. Considering the comments so next question. Considering the comments I heard at the last 4 transition discussions I attended, I feel the transition committee's concluding recommendations for what the congregation desires in a pastor had some obvious omissions. And then there's 3 bullet points. A pastor who supports our music mission, a pastor who supports the congregation's reconciling in Christ designation, a pastor who understands and supports the foundation as a separate entity from the congregation and its council. So the question is, with all that preamble, the question is, how do you feel about each of the above? So I got a couple things to say about this. First, I'm not going to ask who wrote this question, but I bet that it was somebody who is either a current or a retired college professor, because this question, the way it's written, reminds me of any number of final exam questions that I had to answer in college and in seminary. That being said, let me go through all the different sections of this question and answer. The music here, the music here at Grace, as I think I've already talked a little bit about, is one of the things that I am most jazzed about. You get what I did there? Jazzed? When I think about life here at Grace. I don't know whether we ever play jazz here, but it might be fun. The rich and deep and vibrant music life that y'all have here is really invigorating for me. I think that some of you know that I pretend to be a musician and play almost adequately a few instruments. And so, and in fact, I was standing in the back of the sanctuary today talking to Nicole during the closing hymn, saying, with just a big smile on my face, saying, oh my gosh, I love the music here in this place. So music, yes, entirely supportive of the music program that we do here. I think it's life-giving. I think it's one of the assets that this congregation has that we could figure out that we might think about whether we want to figure out how to use that in more and bigger ways. Reconciling in Christ. I am glad to know that Grace is a Reconciling in Christ congregation. For those who might not be familiar, Reconciling in Christ is a particular designation within the ELCA, our denomination, that indicates that a congregation has gone through a specific and particular process to own the truth that everyone is welcome in God's kingdom, in God's reign, whether no matter who you are, no matter what. Particularly, Reconciling in Christ has to do with folks who do not identify as heterosexual. Reconciling in Christ means that we welcome folks that are gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, et cetera, et cetera. Oh, Ron and Nancy say we have enjoyed jazz worship once in a while, so that's fantastic. So Reconciling in Christ. I am absolutely glad to know that Grace is a Reconciling in Christ congregation. From my perspective as a straight white man, I understand that I occupy an unearned place of privilege in our world. I also believe that there's no reason that I deserve any more than anyone else. And so I support all work for justice and equality that we do through the church, whether it's through Grace Lutheran Church, through the Rocky Mountain Synod, through the ELCA, or through the church writ large all around the world and in various places. So Reconciling in Christ, yes, absolutely. As for the foundation, the question was a pastor who understands and supports the foundation as a separate entity from the congregation and the council. I don't understand the foundation. Not yet, anyway. It will be good to lift up Reconciling in Christ work as we move forward as a congregation, says Amy. Sorry, just saw the chat. I don't quite understand the foundation yet, but that's okay because it's a different sort of a thing, and I anticipate learning about how the foundation operates and etc. The history of this congregation and the history of the foundation is fascinating, I think, and I am excited to work with folks here to think about how we use the resources that we have here at Grace, including the foundation, including, like I mentioned a minute ago, the music ministry, including, as Amy just pointed to and as we thought about, the Reconciling in Christ identity that we have, and all the rest of the assets that we have here at Holy Love. I'm excited to work with folks here to think about how we use these resources to expand on the work that God is already doing on the Hill and around Boulder and in the places that we, this congregation, live. So I can't say that I understand the foundation, but yeah, I'm excited to learn to understand the foundation and to see how we use the foundation to expand ministry that we already do here at Holy Love and that God is already doing. Next question. Did you have an opportunity to get some helpful input from former Pastor Ron Roschke and interim Pastor Stephanie Kopsch? I have spent some time talking with Pastor Stephanie. I have spent some time talking with Pastor Zach. I know Pastor Ron, and I have known him since I first met him probably in early 2001 after I came to this synod while I was serving as associate pastor up at Bethlehem. This was when he was here. But I have not talked yet with Ron, Pastor Ron, about grace. One of the things that we as pastors do is that we talk to each other about this, that, and the other thing. And so, well, just for instance, when I took the call at Holy Love, I gave the pastor who had served there before me a phone call a couple of different times, and I had never met him in person before I called him on the phone, but I knew of him and I knew who he was, and he knew of me and knew who I was. And so he and I talked with each other when some stuff came up at Holy Love um, just so that I could be as effective as possible doing the ministry that I was called to. And so, we as pastors are most often happy to talk with one another about ministry because we want the best for the ministry that happens in the congregation that we serve, and we want the best for the ministry that happens in the congregations that our colleagues serve as well. Let's see, I think that yeah, I get to this, some of this, the answer to this question in the next one. So I'm just going to skip to the next one right now. And, and hopefully some of the answer to this one will flesh out the answer to the previous one as well. So the next question, when Bishop Gonya met with members of Grace a few months ago, some of us felt that he did not have an accurate grasp of the characteristics and culture of the congregation. He also indicated that he did not feel that the congregation was ready and able to manage a call process without assistance. Parenthetically, right now, I'm not going to put Bishop Gonya on the spot and ask him any of these questions. He's going to stay muted. Continuing here, without debating either of these perceptions, could you please, bullet point 1, tell us how the bishop and or his staff describe the characteristics and culture of Grace to you? Bullet point 2, tell us whether he gave you any confidential information or guidance about Grace or its members. Respecting the confidentiality of pastoral communications, a yes or no answer would be sufficient. So, answer. When the bishop and the office of the bishop, the staff of the office of the bishop talked about Grace, what I heard is that Grace as a congregation has a rich and fascinating and intriguing history, that Grace has deep roots in Boulder, that the membership of Grace by and large has deep roots at Grace. And what I heard is that Grace has tremendous potential to continue our life as a vibrant and life-giving congregation. So that's what I heard the bishop and the staff of the office of the bishop tell me. I'll go on to talk about, let's see, did the bishop give you any confidential information, etc. So when a pastor prepares to move into a new call, that pastor talks with the bishop. That pastor talks with the staff of the office of the bishop. That pastor talks with other pastors who are familiar with the congregation. We share all kinds of information and insights with each other. Like I said, in the first, my notes here say 18 months of my call at Holy Love, I called my predecessor any number of times. And here's better language than what I had a minute ago. I called my predecessor any number of times when I ran into something about the culture there that confused me. This is one of the things that pastors and ministry staff do with and for one another, because the healthy pastors among us, and not all of us are, but most of us are, the healthy pastors among us want the ministry that happens in our own congregations, the congregations we serve, and we want the ministry that happens in the congregations that our colleagues serve. We want that ministry to succeed in the same ways. So we want ministry to succeed here. We want ministry to succeed down the road. We want ministry to succeed across town. We want ministry to succeed, on the other side of the metro area and on the other side of the state. We want ministry to succeed, and we recognize that the ministry that we are called to do here at Grace is different from the ministry that, for instance, Trinity is called to do downtown. We recognize that the ministry that we're called to do here and that Trinity is called to do is different from the ministry that Atonement is called to do. And so what we want to do is we want to help each other out. I have said any number of times to people that came to visit, say, for instance, Holy Love when I was the pastor there, they would come and they say, hey, we love this congregation. We want to be members right now. And I would tell them, I would say, hey, it's great that you want to be a member here right now. What's more important to me than that you join right now is that you find a place where you can serve God and where God can speak to you. And if that happens to be in this place at Holy Love, I would tell them when I was the pastor there, then I would say, great, be here. But down the road is this other congregation. This other direction is another congregation. One of those might be a better fit for you, and it's not going to offend me even a little bit if that's where you belong instead of here. Because one of the things that we do is we support each other in ministry. So yeah, we talk with each other about stuff like that. Um, but it's not secretive or you know anything like that. It's healthy pastors doing our work together to continue to serve healthy congregations, at least in my opinion. Next question. Let's see, I have three more on my list here. And this is parenthetically, this is one of the things that happens when I lead adult ed is often I'll schedule 1 week for adult ed and I'll get talking so much that we end up going 3 or 4 weeks on that same topic instead. So I apologize sort of now for all the times that's going to happen in the future. Next question. It's apparent that the Grace community experienced discord during the last years. What can you tell us about that history, and what is your guidance about the best course to go forward as Christ people? Whatever discord Grace may or may not have experienced, I'm reluctant to say anything about it because I'm reluctant to say anything about anything that happened in the past if I wasn't directly involved in it. And sometimes I'm even reluctant to say anything about it if I was directly involved in it. So whatever Grace has experienced in the past, it happened when I was not part of this community, and so I'm not going to say anything about that. My best guidance for us going forward would be that we do our best to listen to each other, and we do our best to talk with each other honestly. And maybe more importantly, we do our best to listen to God, and we do our best to hear what God has to say to us and to see where God is calling us together. And I don't know where that is right now, but I hope that we explore that together as a congregation. Because one of the primary things that God does is relationship. God calls us to healthy and vibrant relationships. And I feel like that might be one of the first things that we remember here at Grace is that we have healthy and vibrant relationships, and we can do work together to make them more healthy and more vibrant going forward. So that's the answer to that question. Next question. We understand that Bishop Gonya sent you to us with clear directions for your activities during the year. Will you explain what the bishop hopes you will accomplish, and will you tell us what we at Grace can do to help you achieve those objectives? I'm going to not answer that question because the next question I think is give or take essentially the same. And what I'm going to do right now is try to quickly pull up the letter of agreement between me and Grace, not so that you can see it, but so that I can see it, because I made notes on my thing here that said, look at the letter of agreement, but the letter of agreement is open on a different computer, one that's battery is dead right now. And so right this minute, what I'm doing is I'm stalling while I open up this document. And here it comes. So the next question is, what is the definition or job description of a pastor for strategic partnerships? Specifically, what is meant in this context by the term partnerships? So to this question and to the previous one, what does the bishop hope you'll accomplish? What did the bishop send you here to do? Or, sorry, that's my paraphrase. As I'm going to read from this letter of agreement between me and Grace Lutheran Church. And there's a whole bunch of stuff that I'm not going to read because it's pretty straightforward. But I'm going to read the section where it says, we together will intentionally and strategically, and then there's 6 bullet points. So we will intentionally and strategically together explore our congregation's internal relationships between the pastor, council, and our members. Bullet point 2, we will specific or intentionally and strategically clarify our congregation's external relationships with partners such as campus ministry and fellow congregations of the Boulder Broomfield Conference. Parenthetically, from me, our synod, which is a regional area, is divided up into conferences, which are regional areas. So the Boulder Broomfield Conference is one of those regional areas, that the one that Grace is a part of. Bullet point 3, we will together intentionally and strategically review and consider our congregation's current relationships with our local community in general. There's a whole bunch of relationship in all three of those. Bullet point 4, we will together intentionally and strategically seek to mediate any current issues facing the congregation in its internal and external relationships and develop ways of dealing with them. Bullet point 5, we will together intentionally and strategically strengthen our congregation's relationship with the synod, church-wide units, and the resources that may be available for ministry. Again, parenthetically, church-wide in this context is a word that the ELCA made up to talk about all of the ELCA. Bullet point 6, we together will intentionally and strategically subscribe to the Constitution and the bylaws of the ELCA and the Constitution and bylaws of this congregation. So that, in a bullet pointed form, is what I have been called to and have agreed to work with Grace Lutheran Church to be able to do. Moving away from the letter of agreement, what I'm pretty sure I do know is this: every congregation needs is strong. It's important for every congregation to rethink who it is and how it, excuse me, to rethink who it is and how it operates, how it operates in, hold on a second. Okay, I think that's better. Every congregation needs to rethink who the congregation is and how the congregation operates in and engages with the world. And this really should happen on a regular basis if a congregation is going to remain healthy and vibrant. If a congregation just continues to do everything the way it's always been done, then the congregation becomes stagnant and ends up tending toward death. And it's not that death is necessarily a bad thing, because out of death, God brings new life. But there's also ways to engage in new life without a congregation having to die entirely. So what I see my role as is to use the skills and passions that are a part of me to work with the rest of this congregation to dream about how we will engage with each other in ways that bring God's promise of new life to Grace and to the world around us. And some of the things that, and I thought I'd written this down, but maybe I didn't save it. Some of the ways that, this goes back to a way previous question, having to do with why the bishop and the staff of the office of the bishop thought I would be a good match here at Holy Love. I mean, here at Grace. Sorry, that was a habit. I think that some of the things that about me that match well with Grace here is that I'm one of these people who, so when I was in high school, you know, in high school there's all the different groups, all the different cliques that are a part of high school. There's the jocks, and there's the band geeks, and there's the theater nerds, and there's the kids that are too smart for themselves, and there's the we call them the kickers, the folks that lived on farms and worked on ranches and stuff. All of these different kinds of groups. And one of the things that I noticed about myself when I was in high school is that I moved fairly fluidly in and with each of those different groups that was in school. and I seem to be accepted by each of those different groups. And that tendency toward being able to connect with different um, groups of people, different, I'm losing the word for it, but that I've held on to that. I tend to be good at hanging out with high schoolers, and I enjoy even hanging out with middle schoolers, which surprises a lot of people because middle schoolers are kind of chaotic. I seem to be good at hanging out with little kids as well. We had the call I was at before this at Holy Love and at Bethlehem both have preschools, and I got the opportunity. Well, shoot, at Holy Trinity too. Before that, and I got the opportunity to hang out with the preschoolers on a regular basis, and they seem to mostly like me. I also did well when I served as the chaplain at the nursing home, and the quilters at Bethlehem seemed to like me, and the parents of most of the high schoolers and the little kids seem to get along. I seem to move well and get along with all kinds of different people, and so I think that's something. And I seem to have this tendency to be able to listen well to people, especially when we're not doing everything on Zoom. And and so I think those are some of the things that I bring to Grace that fit well with who this congregation is. Um, and something else that I seem to do well is I seem to be able to hear what one side is saying and seem to be able to hear what the other side is saying and seem to be able to have this ability to either see a complete third way or to encourage the sides, if you will, to recognize where they have commonalities and to come to agreement. So in times when there's conflict, I think that that's one of the gifts that I might be able to bring as a way to work through conflict in healthy ways that that doesn't alienate folks, because that's not what we want to do. Is we don't want to alienate folks that are part of our community. Um, let's see. The last thing on the chat is, would you be willing to make those bullet points available to Grace? And that question was about the bullet points that are the six that I articulated from the letter of agreement. And yeah, anybody is welcome to see the letter of agreement. I don't believe that it's a private document. It's between Grace Lutheran Church and me through the facilitation of the office of the bishop. And so I'm happy to make that public. If you want to see that, not just those bullet points, but the whole document, heck, you're welcome to see it. So those are the answers to the questions that I had sent in addition to the almost all of the ones that showed up on chat. I just see one that just came in like 4 seconds ago. It says, before you go, what is household ministry? That's a good question. So when I was serving at Holy Trinity in Ephrata and at Bethlehem in Longmont, like I mentioned, I was doing a big part of my call at each of those places was youth and household ministry. And so one of the things that I tried to do was to become as expert as possible in the field of youth ministry. And one of the things that folks who theologized about youth ministry 20 years ago, one of the things that we were talking about was the truth that when you do ministry with and for and among, for instance, middle schoolers and high schoolers, it's important to not connect only with the middle schoolers and high schoolers, but to recognize that the middle schoolers and high schoolers are part of other systems, including primarily the system that is their household or their family. So when I talk about household ministry, it's often thinking about young people in relationship to their parents, and it's often when I think about household ministry, it often means what a lot of people think of as family ministry. But one of the phrases that Martin Luther, you know Martin Luther, he was the first Lutheran. Well, I don't know, Paul might have been pretty Lutheran. Anyway, one of the phrases that Martin Luther used when he had written the Small Catechism, which was a document that wasn't intended to be used by pastors in confirmation classes, but was a document intended to be used by parents in with their to teach their children the faith. The phrase that he used was not family, but was household, to talk about whoever happens to be living under a roof in a particular time period. So for Luther, imagine Luther's day, a household might have been mom and dad and, I was going to say 2.2 kids, but then it would have been 6.8 kids. Um, and and then also maybe grandma and grandpa were living there, and maybe you had some hired workers who were working the field, and they lived under your roof. And maybe there was a somebody traveling from Rome up to Denmark, and they needed a place to stay that night, so they would stay under your roof. So whoever happens to be under your roof at that time is your household, the way Luther thought of it. And so when I talk about household ministry, what I think of is that group of people that happens to be living under the roof, your roof at this particular time. So in my personal household, right this minute, that includes me and Nicole, who you met a little while ago, but she had to take off and go back to the house. And the three boys, Gabriel and Lucas and Emmett, and sometimes my daughter Harper, because she's back here from school doing the remote learning on the computer. Um, and so sometimes she stays in our household and sometimes she stays at her mother's house. And sometimes it means Sienna, who is the boy's cousin, the 10-year-old who often shows up at our house and does all kinds of this, that, and the other thing. And if we happen to, I mean, if we had a friend who came to stay with us for, a couple of days or a week, they would be part of our household as well. So, what is household ministry is the question. Household ministry is the ministry that the church does in order to support the growth and life of faith within the households that are connected to the congregation. I hope that was a decent enough, a good answer. So having answered the questions that y'all sent in, either to Amy anonymously or on the chat here to me privately, that's the answers that I have. And oh my goodness, that was like an hour and a half or an hour and 15 minutes, wasn't it? Sorry to take so long. I don't know if anybody wants to jump in with live microphone questions, or if we're all ready to go have lunch and do the next thing that's on our busy agendas for a Sunday afternoon. It looks like Bishop Goni wants to say something. No? Okay.
No,
Uh,
thanks for letting me sit in. It wasn't my intention necessarily to, in case people were thinking that somehow I planned to be here with you today for doing this, it was not my intention, but I appreciate the questions, and I certainly appreciate, Pastor Matthew, your responses, and I hope folks can see, first of all, there's no big secret agenda, and,
right.
and B, I hope you see why my staff and I felt like Matthew was such a good match for Grace at this time, and wish you every blessing as you move forward in ministry.
Thank you, Bishop. I, I think we're through our questions. I think I'm ready to go home and have lunch. So if there's nothing else from anybody else, I'll send you off. Go in peace to love and serve the Lord again. Thanks, everybody.